Well, welcome to Christ and Culture, Christian Answers for another program today. And today we have a really positive article from the Detroit News about a former quarterback for the Detroit Lions who became a football analyst on television, a commentator, and there was an injury that occurred on the field, the football field, and he just spontaneously, without thinking, broke out into praying for this player over national televised sports. So it went out to millions of people, and he was praying to God for the well-being of this injured football player. And I think it's great because a lot of times these are spontaneous acts of Christian faith that people who really believe just do these things. They're not performance, they're not acts, they're not deliberate in the sense of they planned it or premeditated. It's just when something happens, you just feel like you want to react in a Christian way, and so this Christian did. So let me read the article. I think it's really encouraging, and it's an inspiration to all of us to not be ashamed or shy or afraid of acting Christian in public. And I know a lot of people on the job and in government, for example, want to keep separation of church and state and separation of faith and life in the public. There's this bad philosophy going around that you're supposed to keep your private faith private and not bring it into the public. Well, that is totally contradictory of the New Testament. And Jesus told his disciples, we're disciples today, but he told his original disciples, go out into the world and make disciples. So you have to go out into public, and you don't just stay within the four walls of the church or in the walls of your home. You go out into public and you communicate the faith. You teach the truth that God has revealed in his word. And we need more of that public engagement and not less of it. So here is a man who is a good example of public engagement. He's going about his business, and all of a sudden something happens, and so he leads millions of people in praying for this person who was injured. So let's get into the article, and I think you'll find it interesting as I do. It says Detroit Faith City, that's the series that they have in this newspaper. Why ex-Lions QB Orlovsky prayed live on ESPN for Bill's Hamlin. And some of you may have remembered this event. It happened back in 2005. Well, wait a minute. No, not 2005. That's when he came to the Lions. Let's read the article. I'll get into the commentary. When Lions quarterback Dan Orlovsky met Pastor Dave Wilson at training camp in 2005. Orlovsky, by his own admission, was very stereotypical athlete who had money, popularity, fame, and women, but was as empty as ever in his spiritual life. So he's a typical jock, as we used to call him. He gets a lot of attention, has a lot of talent, very popular, and that brings in a lot of money, fame, and of course a lot of women want to be near him, with him, because he's got all these things going for him. More than 20 years later, Orlovsky and Wilson are longtime friends and are the fifth guests on Faith City, a Detroit podcast that features local athletes, entertainers, and public figures talking about their faith along with their spiritual mentors. Their story centers on Orlovsky's leap of faith in 2023 when ESPN analysts prayed live on air for Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin, who was hospitalized after suffering cardiac arrest in a Monday night football game against Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, okay, so I do remember this, and the reason I remember it, it was only a couple years ago, and you probably remember hearing this in the news, where this Buffalo Bills safety had a cardiac arrest during a live football game where millions of people in the United States and all over the world watch on Monday Night Football. And Orlovsky is a commentator on Monday Night Football, ESPN. And this is what he said: God, we come to you in these moments that we don't understand, that are hard, because we believe that you're God, and coming to you and praying to you has impact. Orlovsky said on NFL Live, January 3rd, 2023. We're sad, we're angry, we want answers, but some things are unanswerable. We just want to pray, truly come to you and pray for strength for Damar, for healing for Damar, and for comfort for Damar to be with his family and to give him peace. We don't believe that prayer didn't work. We wouldn't ask this of you. God, I believe in prayer. We believe in prayer. We lift up Damar Hamlin's name in your name. Amen. So that was his prayer on national television. The public display of prayer on national TV has been called one of the most memorable moments in ESPN's 45-year history, and Wilson says that prayer has had an amazing impact around the world as a model of what you can do when somebody's in trouble. I think more of it is a model of Christian concern in the public, of not being afraid to be a Christian in public. And what I mean by that is not being afraid to bring your Christian values and your Christian behavior in public for fear of criticism. I know a lot of professions, they officially frown on Christians from expressing Christian values and beliefs and behaviors in their profession, because they say that it might make people uncomfortable. Well, it does make some people uncomfortable. It might have made, for example, this man's prayer on live television might have made some atheists uncomfortable, because they don't believe in prayer. They don't believe in a God-hearing prayer, and they don't believe in a God-healing God, and they don't believe that prayer does anything. They believe it might be just a gesture of goodwill, or might be a nice sentimental gesture, but they don't believe in it. So they might have been offended. Well, I think as Christians, we have to go ahead and be bold and say, look, this is what I would do in this situation because I'm a Christian. So I'm going to do this in this situation, and I'm going to pray for this person who needs help. It's sort of like the old foxhole in Battlefield situation, where they used to say there are no atheists in the foxholes, because when the bullets are flying fast and furious around you and explosions are going off and you think you might be dying or be dead in the minute, it doesn't seem logical for anyone to reject a prayer. And actually, a lot of the so-called atheists give out a prayer during those times also. So this was more of a genuine Christian response, and I think it's great. I'm glad that he did pray this prayer publicly, and I am glad that he was willing to do that, and I'm glad it has really inspired a lot of people to be more bold in their faith. Here he is, this quarterback, former quarterback for the Detroit Lions, with the star quarterback of the Lions, Matthew Stafford, here, who is now with the LA Rams. In the video above and the podcast and transcript, Orlovsky describes the mixed feelings he had before going on the TV set, to reject passivity and to trust God, and even now, how he has to be careful not to pat himself on the back and saying, good job. Pastor Wilson talks about Dan's courage in the moment, the power of prayer, and he recounts the story in 2024 when Hamlin recovered and back in the Bills lineup, sat in the front row of a Bible study at Ford Field in tears, grateful for Orlovsky's heartfelt prayer. So the man they were praying for, Damar Hamlin, was grateful for Orlovsky's prayer on national television, because you had Orlovsky leading millions of people to pray for Damar Hamlin. And that just shows you that even in our secular world, where people Yes, there's no question about it. Christianity and prayer and Bible study and church attendance and devotion to God have fallen away a lot. There's a lot of backsliders and a backsliding in our culture. There's no question about that. I mean, who could question that? When you look at statistics, you look at the moral landscape, and, uh, you know, on paper, there might be, I guess, 65, 70% of the population identify as Christian, but how many of those that identify as Christian are actually living out the faith? Not very many. And so, but they do know that there is a God, and they know actually in their hearts that they've fallen away and backslidden. And maybe the prayer would call them back to faith and call them back to the reality. I'm super grateful to have been a part of it, Orlovsky said. But looking back, what if I never got drafted by the Lions, or what if spiritual mentors John Kitna had never signed there, or Josh McCowan had never signed there? If Dave Wilson wasn't there, does that happen? Or what if we were winning? Orlovsky started 7 games at QB on an 0-16 teams in 2008, and really good. Do we have some of the spiritual growth that we had? Yeah, he's contemplating and he's thinking about the shoulda, woulda, couldas. What if he had been successful? He was a starting quarterback on a team that went 0-16. So he was on a really bad Lions team. And I remember the Lions were bad for a long time, a real long time. And they just kept having losing season after losing season. And he was not that really good of a quarterback. Although you can't roll it all on him because it was a whole team effort to lose that many games. But he was the quarterback there when they had their worst seasons. So the Lions don't look at him as one of their greats. But he's saying, in the providence of God, even those losses and even those defeats and even me failing at turning the team around as a quarterback, those things work together for good because I was given a platform as an analyst where I could be of influence with my Christian faith, and he was. In his moment of testing, in that moment of crisis when Damar Hamlin went down on the field, he was able to lead a whole football nation in prayer. And that's great. That's great. And I think we need to see more of that. We need to have more of these kind of Christians in all the different spots in society, all the professions. And, for example, Christian doctors standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to perform any abortions. Christian nurses saying, no, we're not going to be a part of an operation that kills a human baby in the womb. I just won't do that. And if that makes my career ended and I get blacklisted and rejected because I won't perform abortions, okay, well then I won't be a nurse. I'll be something else. And the same with the doctors. If the doctors are blacklisted in their profession and no hospital or doctors guild will have them, then if that ends their career, that ends their career, but they have to take a stand. Same way with Christian surgeons. If you're a Christian surgeon and you are told by the hospital that you have to operate on a 12-year-old teenage girl because she wants to identify as a boy, and she wants top surgery, and she wants to have an artificial male sex organ operated attached to her. No, the Christian doctor says, no, I don't believe in that. That's against my Christian faith. God is against that. He fearfully and wonderfully made all of us, as the Bible said in the book of Psalms, and that I'm not going to try to distort and pervert God's created order. He would say, I will operate and perform surgery on genuine cases of deformity to try to get them back into the created order, like if a girl has a deformity and he could help her have normal female sex organs, or a boy, he could help, but he will not perform a surgery that would castrate a man trying to become a woman, or a boy trying to become a girl. No, that is against the created order. That's against God's will. And the surgeon has to be able to take a stand and say, no, I will not do that, whether it ends his career or not. We're all called to be disciples of Jesus Christ and to live for Christ. And if that sometimes means that we lose our position, our job, our career, well, that's what happens. And the same way with this analyst for ESPN, he took a risk that by praying he might offend the top brass at ESPN, or he might offend fans enough that they would call for his firing. He could lose his job. So it is a risky thing to step out in faith, but I think it's good inspiration to do so. Did I start playing football at 8 years old for that moment? The way I look at it, a bit different. Did God kind of pave this path, this journey for me in football and in life for what? For that? Was that always the moment type of thing? It's absolutely incredible, but it's definitely one that I look back and makes me ask a lot of questions about the past. So he is waxing philosophical, and he's waxing spiritually theological about, did God prepare him for that one big moment so that he could be a witness to millions of people around the country and in the world that, hey, God is alive and we're going to pray for him. So let's bow in prayer. And so he led millions, probably tens of millions of people in prayer for this football player who had a heart attack or cardiac event. Lessons like these of rejecting passivity and grace, humility, forgiveness, hope, and strength in the face of tough times are common themes in our Detroit news shows. Okay, so it's talking about its podcast and going down, which seems like a good segment for the Detroit news to have. Talks about Jim Harbaugh and his Christian faith. It talks about former Detroit Tigers Willie Horton's and his Christian faith, and some of the other. Motown legend Martha Reeves talks about her early faith journey. And a lot of the gospel singers, famous African-American gospel singers, were found and discovered in the churches. Unfortunately, a lot of them turned secular, like a Whitney Houston, and their life goes down the tubes when they turn secular. But the fact that is we need Christians in every sphere of life. We need Christians who are not afraid to stand up and say, I'm a Christian, and I'm not afraid to actually act like a Christian. I'm not afraid to admit that I pray and I read my Bible. I'm not ashamed of that. And I'm not even ashamed to invite you to church, and I'm not ashamed to invite you to Christianity. If you have backslidden or walked away from the faith, or never have been a Christian but have always wondered about Christianity. And Christians, we need to engage people with the faith. We have Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. We need to share that faith. And it sounds like this quarterback, it says by his own admission, was very stereotypical athlete, money, popularity, fame, and women, but was empty as ever in his spiritual life. So that's the story of so many people. It's not just athletes, but it's so many people in the secular world. We don't have that common Christian cultural background now that our culture used to have. For example, if you were born, say, 100 years ago, you would have a common Christian heritage culture where you would pick up a lot of the truth of the Bible. You would pick up a lot of moral truths. You would pick up a lot of Christian attitudes and behaviors. You wouldn't have to go to church to find out about these truths. You would pick them up by just living in a semi-Christian culture. And the worldview of Christianity permeated the whole culture, say 100 years ago, or even beyond that, 200 years ago. And in the West, generally speaking, for many centuries. You just pick all of these things up secondhand. You wouldn't have to be actually taught in a church. For example, young people would just pick up in the Christian culture centuries ago, or even decades ago, that sex is reserved for marriage. You're supposed to wait until you get married, and then you are to be faithful within that marriage with your wife. You weren't necessarily taught that directly from a Christian pastor on Sunday morning, or you weren't taught that in Sunday school, or you may have never actually heard a teaching on that in the church that you attended, if you attended, but you would pick that up in the community because that's just what a Christian community and a Christian culture teaches, that you're supposed to wait until marriage and you get married and then you have children and you remain faithful to your wife, and you would never think of committing adultery and so on and so forth. Now, does that mean people live by that ideal? No. There were always people who, as single people, would violate the commands of God and act immorally. And there were people within marriages who would violate the commands of God and act immorally. And there were always people like that, but they were the minority. Vast majority would actually follow the Christian teachings because that's what you're taught. That's what the culture reinforced, the institutions in the culture, the schools, the universities, corporate America, the legal system. Every institution of any influence in our culture in the older days would reinforce Christian values for the most part. I mean, there were some situations that were not that way, contradicting the Christian values because of the effects of sin on everyone. There is no perfect ideal society or culture. So all cultures are sinful to some extent, but there was a consensus, a Christian consensus, that kept people in line, accountable. But today, no. Not much pure accountability as far as Christian values or Christian morality today, unfortunately. And in fact, there is a culture today that actually frowns on a lot of the elites and a lot of the powerful institutions of modernity today are secular, and they actually frown on Christians doing what this former Lions quarterback was doing on ESPN when he was calling the game. And it says Orlovsky's leap of faith in 2023 when the ESPN analyst prayed live on air for Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin. The cultural elites in a lot of our institutions today, almost all of them, frown upon this kind of public displays of Christian belief and devotion. They say that violates the separation of church and state. They say that that makes people of other religions and philosophies uncomfortable. They say it's better to be neutral and to not bring your faith into the marketplace. Well, that is false, and the Bible contradicts that, and Jesus teaches us to do the very opposite, to bring Christianity, go out into all the world and preach the gospel, and to communicate the Christian faith, and to live authentically as Christians and not deny the truth. And this is the original Christianity too. When the faithful had to go before the Roman magistrate, and the Romans wanted them to stop preaching and teaching Christ, or the Jewish authorities also would put pressure on the Christians in and around Jerusalem and the Holy Land, stop preaching Jesus Christ. The apostles would say, we must obey God and not man. Jesus said to go out and teach and preach the truth. And so we need to do that and not be afraid. And so they disobeyed the authorities. And it sounds like this quarterback, former quarterback, did not disobey any official policy of ESPN, but he might have violated sort of an unwritten code that you're supposed to keep religion and politics even out of the conversation when you're calling a game. Because after all, you have, for example, in Detroit, Christianity, 67% profess Christianity, 3% profess Islam, 2% Judaism, 1% Buddhism, and another 1% Hinduism. So you have these other religions, and all it takes is a vocal member of Islam or Judaism or Buddhism or Hinduism to raise a ruckus, and then the high-ups at ESPN could have fired him or reprimanded him or apologized or made him apologize. And you know how the script goes. But that didn't happen, thank God. And he was able to lead the nation in a prayer, all the people watching that game. And then from there it spread. When people heard about his prayer, tuned in to watch replays of the prayer. And that just really encouraged, I think, a lot of Christians, and it should encourage us. So I think if we get anything out of this article is that don't be afraid to be authentically Christian in whatever sphere of life you're in, whether it's at work, in the neighborhood, whether you're in a club, organization, whether you're with family, friends. Don't be afraid to talk about your faith. Be very wise and be very sensitive. Don't force things, and don't be too, say, assertive in the sense of pushing yourself and getting in people's faces. And be wise and be careful, because you can alienate people. You can do a lot of harm if you're not sensitive enough. But with wisdom and tact and love and compassion, yes, witness to your faith through your words and your actions and your prayers, just like Dave Orlovsky did on that night when he prayed for Damar Hamlin. And that was a really good witness for the Lord, him doing so. And I think it should encourage us to do the same when we're in similar situations. Hope you find that helpful. We'll see you back next week on another program. God bless.